Dr. Chelsea Haig Zavaleta is the founder of Guiding Cooperation and Positive Parenthood, which offers courses and coaching to families raising neurodiverse children. Alexander Morris Wood is the Dean of Admissions, Transition Programs, and Strategic Outreach at Beacon College in Leesburg, Florida, which is America's first accredited college or university dedicated to educating students with learning disabilities, ADHD, and other learning differences. Day Sanchez is a school psychologist, education specialist, and the founder of 2E Minds, a company that supports the optimal psychological, creative, spiritual, and socio-emotional development of neurodiverse and twice exceptional children. All right, well, let's start the discussion with Dr. Haig Zavaleta. Chelsea, 1 in 5 children lives with learning or attention issues such as dyslexia or ADHD, and when they grow up, many presumably have families. Can we assume that multi-generational neurodiverse households are fairly common?
Yeah, I think we can. There are a number of families dealing with multiple issues, both in parents and in children. And sometimes these issues travel across generations. I think right now, especially, we're seeing a lot of families who were missed during the pandemic. And so it feels like there are more families needing more support right now. And for all of those families, it's to say, okay, we have some challenges and there's lots of ways we can work through them so that both parents and children can be successful.
Thank you, Doctor. Alex, can you talk about the added layer of complexity that parenting with learning disabilities adds to the parenting game?
Sure. I think the biggest layer of complexity is for the parent to separate their experience from their child's. I think we have to remember that anybody with a learning attention issue classified as neurodiverse has had their own experience in the system. So then when the parent is guiding their child through the system, separating their experiences from education, maybe from the transition to college, social emotional issues to their students can be a little difficult. But I also think outside of the complexity, there is a great opportunity there. Families are able to connect and empathize and sympathize in a way that others might not be able to. So for every difficulty, I think there's a huge benefit when you see a family with multiple people who are neurodiverse.
Thank you, Alex. Day, studies show that rearing a child who learns differently amps up the family stress. So, in general, is stress on overload when both parents and kids have learning and attention issues?
Yes, and the answer is yes, but this doesn't mean that every neurodiverse family has to go through this. There are steps that families can take to reverse this stress. And for example, one thing that we know about families of neurodivergent children is that they experience or they are at an increased risk to experience compassion fatigue, which can lead to burnout and irritability, and this can affect the relationship with the child. And this can also affect the interactions between the family members. But there are steps that families can take to reverse and or to prevent compassion fatigue and other types of stressors like this.
All right, thank you, Day. Chelsea, parents typically stress education, but for parents with learning differences who struggle with the 3 Rs, might their anxiety or depression about their learning issues dampen their child's enthusiasm for pushing through his or her own issues?
Yeah, thanks for that question. It's great. So, I think one of the things we know about children and families is that the way that they learn about their world, their challenges, how to access their resources is through co-regulated exchanges, primarily with parents and then with other adults. And so certainly if parents and families have kind of heightened experiences of chronic stress, which we know that families experiencing the challenges that travel together with neurodiversity certainly do, there may be less opportunities for that kind of solid co-regulation. And I think that what we want to focus on here is that, yes, there may be more challenges, and also there are ways that these kinds of families can learn to slow down, engage over and over and over again in those kinds of co-regulated exchanges, so that the kind of defining tenor of the family tends towards empathy, towards understanding, towards co-regulated exchanges, so that kids can thrive. Certainly, a parent's own experiences shape what that will look like, right? Shape the neural pathways that families kind of run on. And also, there's lots of opportunities to step outside of those and learn something new.
Can you give us an example of what you're referring to of these co-regulated exchanges?
Yeah, so if you've had a parent who's perhaps struggled academically themselves as a child, right, when they go to help their own child who may also be struggling academically and perhaps even with the same thing, there might be some trigger, some upset, some challenge that comes up for the parent that makes it hard for them to slow down and focus on their child and focus on a co-regulated exchange in which they're present for their child's experience. And so having opportunities to kind of process that and work through it so that they can show up for their kiddo can be really powerful.
All right, well, thank you. Alex, is it common for the worry about being judged on their ability to parent? Does that shame neurodiverse moms and dads from seeking professional support or help from family and friends a lot?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question, because I think first it's important to remember that most people who are neurodiverse that went through the American education system, especially in special education, that they went through a model that is based on people's deficits. So services were geared towards building skills based on areas of weakness. They've had their own experience with educators, counselors, social groups, psychiatrists. And I think when the student becomes the parent and that role changes, I could absolutely see some hesitation in wanting to seek out services, because not only are they going to now watch their child go through a similar model, because of the role of the parent in the education system, they're also going to be looked at critically about what they're doing to enhance skill development or deter from skill development. So it might not be so much always shame related, but it could be fear based. It could be based off of their own projection of their prior experiences, like we've been talking about, and maybe some fear that they're not going to be able to intervene in a way that teachers, counselors, school professionals will deem appropriate. So I definitely think there is a form of hesitation there that will deter from a fully collaborative model.
Thank you, Alex. Day, so you have these families where parents and kids are struggling with issues such as distractibility, impulsivity, disorganization, communication, and inappropriate social skills. What can parents do to ensure that these issues don't derail their children's success in school and beyond?
That's a really good question. So every neurodiverse family looks different, and there are many factors that contribute to more positive or negative outcomes. So we are looking at child characteristics and the parent characteristics and the interplay between these factors. We are also looking at cultural factors, societal factors, the amount of supports that the family has. We are also looking at challenges and weaknesses and all the interplays of these things. And so one of the things that I always tell the parents that I work with is to remember their ABCs. So A stands for awareness, B stands for balance, and C stands for connection. And so in terms of awareness, we want to make sure that parents are aware of the kind of supports that they might have available to them or that they might have access to in the school setting or community-based supports. We also want to make sure that families are aware of their own triggers, emotional triggers, or sensory needs, sensory preferences, and know when the child's preferences and needs might clash with the parents. And also, we want to make sure that parents are aware of the kind of supports or skills that they might be deficient on and that they need to build. In terms of balance, we want to make sure that families have a strong self-care plan, because we know that routines and consistencies, consistent schedules are really important for both the child and the parent. And so we want to make sure that parents are getting those supports that they need. If they need to build those skills with organization or time management, this is really important. And then in terms of connection, it's important for families to not isolate themselves, but to find strong and healthy social networks that they can then rely on if they maybe need to take a break, or just have support, a strong support system that they can use when needed.
Okay, thank you, Day. So, Chelsea, neurodiverse parents often have specific areas of challenge that affect their parenting success, but the converse is often also true. How can parents work these strengths to the benefit of their kids?
Yeah, so I think when we think about neurodiverse parents, these are people who have had for a lifetime a set of experiences that inform their parenting. So I'm going to assume that a parent with a neurodiverse parent, has been dealing with sensory processing issues, or has been dealing with executive functioning, or has been dealing with managing impulsivity for their whole life, and such have a wealth of experiences to draw on that can inform them as they raise their own child. And I really want to highlight that, right? I want to use all of those things that family or that individual knows about themselves, about the world, about how it works, in order to support that child. I might have that parent say to their child, say you have a parent who's really struggling with executive functioning, and they have a neurodiverse child. And I might say to that parent, you know what? I want for this child there to be a model of working on and working through this challenge. And so that might look like saying to the kiddo, you know what? Mama is still working. I'm still learning about how to manage our calendar. I'm still remembering. I'm still learning about how to remember all of the school commitments and make sure that we tell teacher X, Y, and Z. What are you working on? Right? So I'm just going to use that challenge as an area of strength for the adult to model for the child how they can be successful, how they can work through challenges, and how they can learn, to be with themselves in a way that works for the world and works for the family. So I would really highlight that as a site of empathy, a site of connection building, and an opportunity to say, hey, look, in our family right now, we need a little bit of support with X. Let's go get it. Here's how we do that. Oh, that didn't work. We can try again this way. So I'm modeling resiliency in the parent-child relationship and for the child as they grow.
Thank you for that, Chelsea. So, Alex, when it comes to challenges for these parents, I imagine homework help must be high on the list.
Sure.
How can parents manage this frequent headache?
Yeah, it's a great question. Homework is a headache for, I think, all parents, but for students who learn differently and for parents who are neurodiverse, it could ignite some anxiety because it might highlight some of the executive functioning deficits that they might have, or if they have a specific learning disability in reading, writing, or math, it could impact their ability to help their child, and in response, it could impact their self-esteem and their version of their self-worth. So I think there's a couple things to do that would be important. I think first is the parents still need to be very involved in the child's schooling. So much has changed over the past 15 years to support students in their executive functioning, things like organizing their materials, accessing resources, having assignments tracked in a central location. So if the parent understands kind of the organizational system of the school, they're going to be at a different advantage to help their child that previous generations didn't have access to. And I think it's also really important to think about how the child functions, what their response is, and be more aware of your own response. If something is adding to your stress, maybe it is how your child's responding, maybe it's a specific problem, making sure that you're regulated during that process will be really important. But I think very similar to what other panelists have just talked about, it's being really aware of your resources, identifying kind of the best time and place for you to support your child, and being okay with accessing additional help if needed.
Thank you. So, Day, individualized education programs provide important support and accommodations for children who learn differently. But I'm wondering whether neurodiverse parents should disclose in the IEP meeting that they also have a learning disability.
Yes, this is a really good question. And sometimes parents might think that they might be discriminated against for providing this information, but there are protections that parents have against this. And the more information that the IEP team has, the easier it will be for the IEP team to support the needs of the child and the family. So there might be some community-based supports that parents can have access to. So every school and every district looks different in terms of the funding or the access to resources that they might have. And so when the parent discloses this information, people in the IEP team, like the school psychologist or the social worker, can do research and can find more information about how parents can get some additional support or some extra support that can come through public funding or community-based supports. And so it's really important to disclose this information so that parents can get the support that they need, and they can get all the access to any resources that they might have that they might not be aware of.
All right. Chelsea, parenting children who learn differently as a parent who learns differently must be at times very taxing. And Dave was mentioning the importance of self-care. So I'm wondering if you can share with us some self-care tips for these parents to keep their mental and emotional engines running at optimal levels so they can provide the support that their kids need.
Yeah, thanks so much for asking this question. I think self-care really is one of the most critically important gifts that we can give our child or our children. And certainly a parent who is not experiencing their own sense of inner calm is going to really struggle to help their child regulate and calm. So what I usually tell parents is that we want to think of self-care in a couple of different ways. So I want to think about what is something that the parent can do when something big is happening, and maybe that's the only adult on hand or multiple kids in the mix, and you only have 5 seconds to take care of yourself. So you're starting to get activated, starting to feel frustrated. What is the thing that you can say to yourself? What is the mantra you can say? What is the yoga pose you can get in? What is the breathing pattern that works for you that is going to help you just reset? Right? So you can parent from a place of quiet, of calm, a place that you want to come from, right? So I want to be able to reset your system. I also want folks to think about what the practice is if you've got 5 minutes. So a little bit more time. Perhaps you can go for a walk around the block with your child. Perhaps you can do a short yoga class with your child. Perhaps you can call a friend, right? Maybe things aren't so in such a moment of distress that you have to be there. Maybe you can step outside onto the porch and call a friend to get back to a place so that you can parent with some intentionality. And then there's also some value in thinking about how does self-care kind of writ large play out in your life. So what can you do when you have an hour? What is the practice that you have when you have a couple of hours to really take care of yourself? And those are the places where showing up for ourselves models for our children how to regulate, how to build resilience, and also lets us ground and center in a place so we can parent with intentionality. The last thing I'll say is that I want to encourage parents to talk to themselves the same way that they would talk to their child or talk to a friend. Most parents say things to themselves like, I'm never going to be able to do this. This is so hard. I'm not ever going to be able to parent this child. This is too much. And most adults would never say that to a dear friend who was having the exact same set of challenges. So shifting the internal narrative to sound more like, this is really hard. I've got this. I can get through the next 5 minutes. Or this is really hard. Tonight I'm going to take a bath. That's going to help me calm down. Or my child really needs me right now, and I'm the best person to support them through this. I don't know, I don't really know what to do, but I'm working on learning new strategies. So I just want to shift the narrative so that it's forward facing and that I'm telling myself that I believe that this is going to work and that I've got it in the same way that I want my child to receive that message from me. So self-care is really critically important. And I encourage all of you parents out there to really take a little bit of time, both in the moment, to think about what you can do in 5 seconds, in 5 minutes, and also on a regular basis, whether your child participates with you or not, in an hour or in a day, kind of on a regular way to take care of yourself.
Good advice, Chelsea. Thank you. So, Alex, you work with students transitioning to college. Are you seeing multi-generational collegians in these families where parents and children both have learning and attention issues?
Yeah, absolutely. While parents will not always disclose, we definitely see symptoms or trends because a large part about the transition to college that especially happens in the summertime really taxes a lot of executive functioning skills. Students with learning differences are getting support to apply to college, maybe choose the right college in high school, but then you have this, 3 to 4 month gap where families are required to step in and take more responsibility around the matriculation process, applying for accommodations through the Office of Disability Services, making sure all of your forms are completed, ensuring that the student is registered for courses, that they're packing over long periods of time. There's a lot of steps that happen. So what we tend to see in our programs are families and parents specifically who struggle with their own executive functioning requiring significant amount more support. The great thing about it is on our programs, we've already connected emotionally with the families so they feel safe to kind of ask for help. I also think it's really important to remember that that transition for parents is just as difficult as the transition for students. No matter your learning profile, it is a pretty magnanimous shift in your roles and responsibilities. So for parents who are a little more rigid, as maybe due to your profile, it could be hard to make that cognitive and emotional shift to allowing your child to enter a new learning environment with new regulations, with new expectations, and not as much of a voice. But I would encourage any family to both kind of look at it in dual sides, kind of your emotional brain, which is making sure that you're giving yourself opportunities to walk through your own process with your trusted resources, and more of like your wise brain, where you're working towards developing the executive functioning skills necessary to support your students so that their launch into college is successful.
All right. Thank you, Alex. And Day, you get the last word today. So finish this thesis statement. Thriving in a household with neurodiverse children and parents means.
It means having extra self-compassion and taking care of your own needs.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that. Dr. Chelsea Haig Zavaleta, Alexander Morris Wood, and Day Sanchez. Thanks for the knowledge.